It's 1947. The clock just struck 3 a.m. A young advertising copywriter named Frances Gerety is sitting completely alone in the dark, absolutely exhausted, just staring at a blank piece of paper. I mean, she is half asleep, desperately trying to pull a tagline out of thin air that can somehow fix a catastrophic 50% drop in global diamond sales. This was right after the Great Depression, and the diamond industry, it was literally on life support. Americans just weren't buying them.
So, running on sheer fatigue, Frances scribbles 4 little words on a scrap of paper. Honestly, she doesn't even think much of them at the time. In fact, the next morning, her own colleagues at the ad agency actually reject the idea right out of the gate. They thought it was too simple, too plain.
But those 4 words, "a diamond is forever," well, they stuck. They would eventually go down as the absolute greatest advertising slogan of the entire 20th century. It single-handedly saved an industry. But, to really understand why this specific moment was such a do-or-die situation, we have to look at how this whole empire of illusion was built in the first place.
Let's rewind a bit to the late 1800s. Massive diamond deposits are discovered in South Africa, kicking off this frenzied diamond rush. But here's the crazy part. A sickly young Englishman named Cecil Rhodes, he didn't rush out there to dig in the dirt. Nope. He made his initial fortune doing something completely unexpected, selling water pumps to the desperate prospectors who were actually digging in the mud. He was basically selling the shovels during a gold rush. And then he quietly took those water pump profits and just started buying up their mining claims one by one.
Rhodes quickly realized a terrifying truth for his new business model. Diamonds actually aren't rare. At all. They were being pulled out of the ground by the literal ton. And he knew that if all those stones hit the market at once, their value would absolutely plummet to zero. So he realized artificial scarcity was literally his only path to survival. In 1888, Rhodes locked his biggest rival into this grueling 18-hour negotiation, eventually forcing a merger to form De Beers. By 1890, they controlled a staggering 90% of the entire global diamond supply.
To keep that absolute stranglehold going for decades, a financier named Ernest Oppenheimer stepped in and perfected something he called single-channel marketing. And honestly, this perfectly shows just how utterly ruthless this cartel was. 10 times a year, De Beers would invite exactly 250 hand-picked buyers to their London offices. They'd hand you a small box of rough diamonds. They called it a sight. The catch? The price was 100% non-negotiable. You bought the whole box or you bought nothing. And if you dared to refuse, you risked literally never being invited back to London again. They controlled the spigot, turning it on and off with the exact precision of a central bank.
Which brings us right back to Frances Gerety and her 3 a.m. slogan. See, De Beers had total control of the supply side, but they desperately needed to control consumer demand. Before 1938, a mere 10% of American engagement rings actually had diamonds in them. There wasn't some widespread ancient tradition, they were just a niche luxury item. But by wrapping a diamond in this concept of eternal romance, paying to put them on Hollywood actresses, planting stories in the press, De Beers basically manufactured a tradition out of thin air. By 1965, a massive 80% of American brides were receiving diamond rings.
But here is a wild perspective shift for you. There was this deeply cunning hidden psychology behind "a diamond is forever" that solved De Beers' biggest existential threat, the secondary market. Think about it. If millions of Americans started selling their used diamonds, the market would just flood with secondhand stones and prices would inevitably crash. But by equating a shiny rock to eternal, unbreakable love, De Beers made it psychologically impossible to resell. I mean, what kind of person sells their engagement ring, right? Through sheer marketing psychology, they successfully took millions of diamonds permanently off the market, trapping them in family jewelry boxes forever.
And if you think the American market was an impressive feat of social engineering, we have to talk about Japan in the 1980s. Prior to this, there was absolutely zero cultural tradition of diamond engagement rings in Japan, none whatsoever. But De Beers unleashed this hyper-aggressive, targeted marketing campaign, and within a matter of months, by 1981, 60% of Japanese brides were suddenly getting diamond rings. They literally overwrote an entire cultural norm in a single year.
Oh, and you've definitely heard that unwritten rule, right? The one that says an engagement ring is supposed to cost 2 months' salary. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that wasn't an ancient tradition either. It was an entirely fabricated financial benchmark, completely invented by marketers. And it was a brilliantly scalable, invisible tax. It meant that a factory worker and a Wall Street CEO would feel the exact same intense social pressure to spend heavily. Plus, that price tag automatically scaled up with inflation and income levels without De Beers having to lift a single finger. But we need to be clear here. This grand romantic illusion masked a deeply dark reality. Throughout the 1990s, brutal civil wars were tearing across Sierra Leone, Angola, Liberia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Rebel groups were funding their insurgencies and arming child soldiers by seizing diamond mines and selling off the rough stones. And because De Beers' entire business strategy relied on buying up literally all available global supply to keep up that artificial scarcity, their strict stockpiling policy meant they were quietly absorbing these conflict stones right into their vaults. It took an estimated 3.7 million casualties and massive international public outrage before the highly flawed Kimberley process was finally established in 2003 to try and track where these stones were coming from.
So as the 21st century dawned, this once invincible empire finally started to crumble under its own weight. Independent mines in Australia and Canada just started bypassing the De Beers system entirely. Russia began selling its own massive supply directly to the open market. And then in 2004, the US government actually handed De Beers a criminal price-fixing conviction. A monopoly that once held a suffocating 90% of the market plummeted below 40% by 2012. The Oppenheimer dynasty that ruled for 85 years finally just sold their stake and exited the stage.
Yet the ultimate nail in the coffin wasn't even a rival mining company. It was scientists in a laboratory. Modern chemical vapor deposition technology can now pump out diamonds that are chemically, physically, and optically identical to mined stones. We're talking so perfect that even expert gemologists can't tell them apart without highly specialized equipment. And the cost? It plummeted from thousands of dollars to just $800 a carat. De Beers was so threatened by this that in 2018 they actually launched a budget brand called Lightbox, desperately trying to rebrand these identical lab stones as just cheap, fun fashion accessories, all to protect the perceived value of their high-priced mined stones.
So the industry that convinced the entire world to trade 2 months of their life's labor for a shiny pebble is now fracturing. A stone that is neither rare nor particularly useful became one of the most expensive consumer products in history, driven purely by the manufacturing of desire. Which brings us right back to 1947, back to Frances Gerety, the young copywriter who saved an empire of artificial scarcity in the middle of the night. Frances wrote the ultimate symbol of eternal romance. Yet she lived her entire life unmarried and died at the age of 83, having never once received a diamond ring.